Hi, everybody. This is Austin Mayor Kirk Watson, and I'm here with the General Manager of Austin Energy, Stuart Reilly, and we're talking about issues related to Austin Energy. So, Stuart, I'm very proud of Austin Energy and what it's done in terms of being a green leader, not just in Texas, but in the country. We're doing amazing things. And I remember all the way back to when I was mayor the first time, how we had the first Green Choice program and what that meant. And of course, everywhere I go in the country, people are coming up to me all the time and they're saying, "How do y'all do that? How is the energy company able to provide such green resources?" And of course, I guess it's 70% of our generation is carbon free. So as we look to the future, how is it that we're going to stay a leader and maintain that sort of momentum?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you kind of start by going back because it's really baked into everything Austin Energy does now because we were the first in Texas to do a wind energy contract. We were the first to do a
Sure.
utility scale solar project. We have programs that the rest of the industry, asks us about. They're jealous of our programs. How did we get here? And we're happy to have them cheat off our paper because it gets to good environmental outcomes. And even this past year, we set records in terms of local solar. We set records in terms of demand response, which is when you can lower the amount of usage on the grid at times when it's needed the most, and that gets to a good environmental outcome. We're adding new ways for customers to add solar, to access solar programs, and we're even adding more battery storage. So we added one battery storage contract last year for a very large scale battery. We're working on two more right now, and we're looking to bring to council this month two more wind energy contracts for 300 megawatts of wind. So that is the trajectory that we are on. That is part of why all of us at Austin Energy, we love working at Austin Energy. We want to be part of the clean energy transition. And so it is just kind of the ethics that we have at Austin Energy and how we operate.
Part of the DNA, and we're living up to it.
We are, exactly. And you mentioned the 70%. We're in terms of the power we generate at Austin Energy, 73% of it is carbon free. You can compare that to the rest of the industry
Wow.
at 42%.
Yeah,
So we're getting close to being twice as carbon free as the rest of the industry. And that's why everybody looks to us as to, our leadership in this clean energy transition.
well, I must admit, it's fun for me to have bragging rights like that across the country.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the challenges at Austin Energy is really a challenge of everyone that's in the energy business, and that is that demand is increasing. And I'm not just talking about what we read about with data centers and all the big demand that some of those need. I'm talking about just day to day with manufacturing, with things that we consider to be environmental good things, things like uh, EVs and having those vehicles and needing to be charged. While those are environmental wins, they also add to the demand for electricity. Um, and that puts some pressure on our grid and how we talk about batteries, but batteries won't do it alone. As I've heard you say that before. So tell me how we're trying to manage the grid and be able to meet the demand.
Right. Yeah. Um, we're in the middle of the most complex energy transition in modern history. More and more of the economy is being run on electricity. And like you mentioned, it's good environmental outcomes, but we're also supporting the transportation sector now. And that's something
Right.
that the electric industry, so more and more of the economy is dependent on us. And we have to be there to support this economy. And not only are we growing the grid to support this beneficial electrification, we're also hardening the grid. We're responding to more and more extreme weather events. We're also trying to manage this growth and this hardening through historic inflation on all the things that we do. And so we're trying to do it in a way that protects our customers, protects affordability, and so it's about finding the right resources that do the right thing. So batteries are great, and we're adding a lot of batteries, but they don't solve everything. Renewables are great, and we've got a lot of them, and they don't solve for everything. So each resource has its pluses and minuses, and it's about having a diverse portfolio that can show up when customers need it, that can grow and scale to support the economy, but also do it reliably.
When you talk about a diverse portfolio, one of the things that we want to be as carbon free as we can be. We want to be carbon free,
Right.
but I've heard you say that solar and wind and batteries by themselves don't put us in a situation where we will be able to, in some instances, supply what the demand is, particularly if we have real harsh weather events and you need to be able to turn something on immediately.
Right.
Tell me how that works.
Yeah, we've talked a lot through this resource plan process. So, about a year and a half ago, City Council approved our resource generation plan to 2035, and the focus there is on local solutions. The reason we're so focused on local solutions, we have a lot of renewable assets that, solar in West Texas or wind energy on the South Coast or in the Panhandle. But we're getting to a point where it's harder and harder for us to import that power. And so being able to protect our customers here in the Austin Energy Service Territory by having enough power here for those emergencies. And there's really right now there's only gas peakers that can fit the bill. Those are small modular units that fire up in a moment's notice. They're called peakers because they operate at the peak.
When you're at the peak, peak demand.
When the peak demand is hitting and or emergency situation is hitting, there's that resource that you can fire up to support customers and keep the lights on. But even beyond that, it can support our renewable transition, because if you have the local resources to solve for the reliability and to solve for the local pricing in the ERCOT market, you can actually add more renewables outside, because you can actually use those as a hedge in the market to actually bring more of those renewables online. And so looking at that's why I talk about having the right mix. It's still about getting more renewables on the grid, but we have to do it in a way that protects affordability and it protects reliability as
When
well.
I talk to folks, and I must admit, when I first heard the word peakers, I immediately in my head go to a big power plant. And I think, oh, we're gonna build another power plant, or we're building peaker units as part of a big power plant.
Hmm.
Talk to me about what peakers are from a functional standpoint.
Yeah, there's basically two types of peakers. One is literally a jet engine. They're aeroderivatives, and so if you look at the side of a plane, there's two peakers on there. It's something that you can fire up in a moment's notice, and you can connect that. Except the benefit is you put very stringent emissions controls on there. The other type is a reciprocating engine, which basically is what's found at to power a cruise ship. So you have these things that have other applications elsewhere, but they're smaller, they're modular, they're not this giant, 10-story tall building like you might think of when you think of a power plant. They're more like a few shipping containers in size, something like that.
And I want to talk a little bit about, you were talking about peakers and how peakers are used in peak demand. So we've all, if you've lived in Austin at any point in time in the really recent past, we've experienced some very, very harsh cold times where we needed energy and we didn't have the energy. In some instances, that was a result of the way the storm hit Austin. In some instances, it was a result of the statewide grid. Tell me, let's talk a little bit about specifically how a peaker plays in that role, and why we couldn't rely upon renewables.
Right. Yeah. And let me start with why it's harder to do renewables locally to solve for that equation, because solar takes up a lot of space. We have a contract with a solar provider that's 144 megawatts of solar. It takes up more land than Central Park in New York, about 100 acres more land than Central Park. It's twice the size of Lady Bird Lake.
And translate for me 144 megawatts.
Yeah.
In my head, tell me what that means in terms of what I'm powering.
Yeah, 1 megawatt is enough to power about 250 homes. And so 144 megawatt isn't by any means the largest solar array in Texas. It's kind of a small to medium size these days. They're getting to 300 megawatts and above. But when you look at what we have in terms of our gas generation fleet, we have about 600 megawatts. We have 1,800 megawatts of wind. We have 1,000 megawatts of solar. We have a highly renewable portfolio. So I know it gets very technical when we talk megawatts, but just in terms of the scale of what we need, we can't meet that need just with solar locally. There's just not the space. It's why we're very focused on rooftop solar and why we're adding record amounts of it. But the reason that peakers can help in those kinds of extreme situations is we retired 725 megawatts of gas generation here in Austin, the old Decker steam units. Once we retired that 725 megawatts, we started to see issues on our system where we're getting closer and closer to that point where here locally in the Austin area, we don't have enough local generation to meet the need, and we're getting close to those points. And what our data show are that we're going to get there here in the near future. And so we need to act. We need to support reliability. There are outages for different reasons: ice storms that take down wires, those kinds of things. But what we're talking about here are the times when energy need is at the highest in Austin of, a very hot summer afternoon, and we need enough locally here to move across our wires to get to our customers. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve for.
We have some peakers in our portfolio right now. And there's been some discussion about wanting to bring in new peakers. As I understand it, the peakers that we have in our portfolio right now, they're not very energy efficient. So if you want to reduce the impact of using natural gas as part of your generation's portfolio, one thing that you might want to do is you might want to get rid of those old inefficient peakers and replace them with new peakers. Is that part of the idea here?
Exactly. And the way the ERCOT market works, the most efficient resource they can call on is called on first. So for example, renewables, they always get dispatched if they're available. Peakers never displace renewables. Peakers also never displace batteries. If those batteries are charged and available and you need something that can start up quick, the battery would come next. What we're talking about are peakers that are about twice as efficient as the peakers that we have, the 200 megawatts of peakers that we have at Decker right now. And so by adding these peakers that are twice as efficient, those become the next thing that get called on at the peak or in an emergency. And by doing that, you have to call on the less efficient ones much less. You're bringing the more efficient ones. And that's why, but we can add more capacity without bumping up against our carbon emission guardrails, because in the plan that was approved in December of 2024, it laid out carbon emission guardrails that we need to stay within, because protecting our air quality locally is a very important part of the plan as well.
So our value of wanting to protect the air quality can be improved if, even though we may be adding peakers, we can improve achieving our values with regard to emissions, because it would be displacing, in many instances, very inefficient old peakers.
Right. It will be displacing those very inefficient peakers, and then hopefully at some point we won't even need those very inefficient peakers, even for the most extreme of emergencies, because we solve for the reliability equation and we keep getting greener and greener and greener and executing on our environmental goals. And technology is changing, it's adapting. Peakers aren't a forever solution, but they are always going to be that critical backstop, that insurance policy that's always there for customers.
They're not a forever solution, and they're not an all the time solution.
That's right.
Austin has been very methodical and very thoughtful and intentional when it comes to our generation capacity. We look at, of course, the environmental aspects of it, and we want to be. The term we use all the time is we want to be a sustainable energy company. We also pay attention to the affordability, because, after all, one of the big issues is you might be able to achieve greater environmental protection, but you do it where people can't really afford to have the energy that they need. And then the third is reliability. We need to make sure that our generation capacity achieves our environmental. It also is as affordable as we can responsibly make it, but it has to be something that is reliable. Talk to me a little bit about the reliability aspect and how important that is to being able to achieve the other two.
Yeah, and when we talk about this a lot, we're talking about trade-offs, because there's no perfect solution. It's finding the right balance, because you could have a system that's 100% reliable for every kind of situation ever known to man, but it's not going to be very affordable, and it's probably not going to be environmentally sustainable. And so finding the right trade-offs between those goals, and we've talked to our community a lot about that, and what we heard loud and clear was reliability is the baseline of what we have to have.
We don't want the lights and the air conditioning or the whatever to go out.
Right. And that goes hand in hand with the energy equity component that we talk to with our customers, because we don't want this clean energy transition to leave vulnerable customers behind, because reliability
About that. Who are we talking about?
well, when we talk about reliability for our medically vulnerable customers or our low income customers, reliability can be a social justice issue, because if you don't have the means to refill your refrigerator the next day after a power outage, it could take those customers weeks to be able to do so. And so thinking about environmental sustainability, and we feel that that is a social justice issue and is a very important issue, but we also need to understand that we can't leave these customers behind who depend on us for medical devices, to manage keeping their food from perishing. So all of this is seen by our customers as kind of the baseline fundamental issue upon which we can build for our renewable future.
And I understand that. As I have described it, I've heard it described that it needs to be a three-legged stool. But the difficulty with the three-legged stool is you always think of it as that they all need to be equal. It's not the balance you're talking about, because
Right.
under those circumstances, the only way to have a balanced stool is to have them all the same size. But that may not always work in what we're attempting to achieve here. So I've always likened it to a really good Tito's vodka martini. Vodka, vermouth, and then olives or a twist. So you have those three components, and then we balance it so that we really can enjoy it, and it makes a difference in the way we enjoy that drink.
Yeah, and the Austin Energy version of that is the 73% carbon free that everybody else is envious of. So I think it's finding the right mix, and that's the mix that's worked for our community, and that mix is just going to get even more environmentally sustainable going forward.
I've made myself thirsty.